Back when I was in elementary school, I had a lot of different friends. During those times, I went to several sleepovers, usually with my best friend James or some of my other good friends. At one point during 5th grade though, I remember that I had a friend named Orion. I was pretty good friends with Orion, but not like best friends or anything. I thought he was cool though. He was one of my newer friends because the previous year was his first at my school. I'd been to his house once before for his birthday, and I think his parents were rich or something because their house was super nice. He also had all the latest video games and a giant TV. So one day, he invited me over to have a sleepover at his house, and I was really excited. His mom called mine later in the day, and then the next day, I went to his house after school. When I got to Orion's house, I was surprised to see 2 other kids there. There were 2 guys who seemed to be our age, but I didn't recognize them. They weren't Orion's brothers because I knew he was an only child. He introduced me to them and said they were his friends from his last school. Their names were Joey and Thomas. I had no idea that Orion was having other friends over as well. It made me a little less comfortable because I didn't know these guys, but I figured that it would still be fun. Orion kind of started talking to Joey and Thomas and didn't seem to pay as much attention to me. He talked about things that I didn't really know about, and I felt like the odd man out. We played video games, but had to take turns because there were 4 of us and only 3 controllers. After hours of that, we finally decided to go to bed. We were all going to sleep in Orion's basement. They had a big room with several couches and also had a couple of air mattresses. 2 of us would take the 2 couches, and the other 2 would take the 2 air mattresses. I took the couch which was on the end of the room, closest to the stairs. I really didn't know what time it was when we all went to sleep, but it had to be pretty late. At one time during the night, I woke up. When I did, I saw that Thomas was crouched down at the end of the couch that I was sleeping on. He appeared to be going through my backpack. I mostly had school stuff inside of it, but had a bunch of other stuff as well. I was confused as to why he was doing this. Before I had a chance to sit up or ask him what he was doing, he stood up with my backpack in hand and walked out of the room. I sat up looking around wondering what Thomas, a kid I barely knew, was doing with my backpack. Everybody else was sleeping. About a minute later, I heard his footsteps coming back and I pretended to be asleep. When he was back in the room, I opened my eyes to see. I saw Thomas, but he no longer had my backpack, and my backpack was not back at the end of the couch either. Then, Thomas got back to his air mattress and went back to sleep. I fell asleep again shortly after, and the next morning when I woke up and my backpack still wasn't there, I confronted Thomas. In front of everybody after we were all up, I asked Thomas why he took my backpack during the night. I said that I had seen him. He started laughing, but I could tell in his face that he was nervous. He said that he never touched my backpack, and he didn't know what I was talking about. I described to him in detail what I saw, but he still denied it, and he started to get mad at me as well. I asked him where my backpack was, and then showed everyone how mine wasn't there. They suggested that I didn't even bring a backpack. Now this really made me bad, because it seemed like Joey and Orion were both taking Thomas's side. I told him that I was going home, and I needed my backpack. Then I called my mom. She came to pick me up, and even went inside Orion's house and we both looked for it. But eventually, Orion's parents basically kicked us out and said that if it turned up, they would call us. I went home furious. Obviously, I had taken my backpack to Orion's house because I had gone there straight from school, and I always brought my backpack to school. Inside of my backpack, it was mainly school stuff like notebooks, folders, and pencils, but I also had some things of value, such as my Nintendo DS and several games for it, and other little knickknacks and some food. I told my mom all about what had happened, and she told me she would call Orion's parents again the next day if they didn't find it. This was a Saturday, and the next day, on Sunday, when I woke up, I went outside and on the front step of my house was my backpack. However, it was open and emptied out, except for the school supplies. Literally everything was gone from it other than my notebooks, folders, and pencils. I was livid. The next day at school, I told Orion all about it, and surprisingly, he still took the side of his friend Thomas. He said that he had no clue how my backpack would end up at my front step, and then he got mad at me for accusing Thomas of stealing from me, and said that Thomas was his best friend. That basically ended our friendship, and I never hung out with him again, and barely even spoke to him for the next 2 years until he changed schools again. I really don't know who left my backpack at my front step. There's no way that Thomas would know where I lived. Overall, this was one of the creepiest things to happen to me. This story happened about a year ago. I worked for a company where I would have to travel occasionally for work projects. During one work project in particular, I carpooled and traveled with a coworker named Jake to an area about 4 hours away. I will start out by saying that even before my trip, my overall impressions of Jake were that he was sort of weird. I wasn't all that excited about the idea of just he and I traveling together for work, but when Jake asked me to carpool with him, I just said, sure. Immediately, I hated myself for saying yes so fast, but I didn't want to insult him by saying no. Plus, he offered to do all the driving. I figured that without having to drive, I could tolerate him, and we left that morning and had a long and busy day of work. By the time we were done on location, we had some things that we needed to wrap up. Ideally, we would do this back at the office, but we were 4 hours away and it was already 7 p.m. We drove back and got within about an hour away, but we were both really tired. Jake said that he thought he was too tired to make it back to the office. However, his apartment was only 20 minutes down the road and said I could sleep over if I wanted. The truth is, I didn't want to, but I didn't really have a choice and figured it wouldn't be too bad, so I agreed. When we got to his apartment, I saw that there was already a sleeping bag next to his couch. He said I could sleep in the sleeping bag on the couch, and overall, his place was decent. I pretty much went right to bed after the long day of work, but I woke up suddenly from my deep sleep. The sleeping bag that I was in was as if it was zipped shut completely. It was over my head and I couldn't see anything. I felt around to try to lift the sleeping bag from where my head was, but I couldn't find the top of it. Then I realized what was going on. The top of the sleeping bag was being held shut. It was really hot in there and I was sweating. I also felt like I was running out of air. I tried sitting up, but it was difficult. I was still being held down, and I realized that somebody must be holding the top of the sleeping bag closed. I started hitting at the area and trying to wiggle myself off the couch. At last, I was able to escape. Whoever had been holding the sleeping bag closed was now gone. When I felt the cool, fresh air from the rest of the room hit me, it was refreshing. But as I did, I looked around the very dark living room, and I saw what appeared to be Jake disappearing into the hallway towards his bedroom, and then I heard the door quietly close and lock. Why had Jake done this to me? Was he joking or was he serious? It definitely wouldn't be a good joke to nearly suffocate someone and then run away in the middle of the night. I was wide awake now, and I looked at the clock. It was 5 a.m., and I had been sleeping for a good 6 hours or so. We would have to leave for work in only a few more hours, so I just went on my phone and stayed up for the rest of the night. I really didn't want to take a risk going back to sleep after what had just happened. When it was about 7 a.m., I got ready to leave and waited for Jake to get up. He got up several minutes later and asked if I was ready to go, then we left. I didn't want to bring up the night before of what had happened, and I was wondering if he would, but he didn't. We drove the next 30 minutes to work in almost silence, and it was pretty awkward. After we got to work, we finished up the project, and thankfully, I didn't have to work with Jake for the rest of the day or the next day. And after that, I never saw him again. Like 2 weeks later, when I hadn't seen him at all, I asked a coworker who told me that Jake had been fired. I wasn't able to find out from anybody why he was fired though, but I was glad that he was gone. I remember that I had been friends with him on Facebook, so I searched for him, but he was now gone from Facebook. I thought maybe he deleted me, but after searching, I still couldn't find him. I'm not sure what happened to him or where he went, but I'm almost certain that he tried to suffocate me that night. Many years ago, when I was about 12 years old, I had a sleepover at my best friend Kevin's house. Kevin was my best friend from the time I was about 5 years old until probably college. We are still friends to this day. We had countless sleepovers at either my house or his house, which were only a few miles apart from each other. Typically, it would be on a weekend, like a Friday night to Saturday, and I remember that one Friday, I went over to his house after school. Kevin's house was a split level. His bedroom was on the upstairs, and in the basement was where we hung out a lot. I really liked his basement because they had a bunch of snacks, a big fridge, and of course, a TV and video games. We went down there first and hung out for a while. I remember that Kevin's mom had to go take his sister somewhere, and his dad was at one of his friends' houses. We played video games into the night, and when it was dark out at probably like 8 p.m., all of a sudden we heard a noise coming from the door leading outside from the basement. We both paused the game and looked up at the same time. I think we both asked each other, "Did you hear that?" It was pretty unlikely that Kevin's parents or sister would be trying to enter through the back sliding door in the basement. Neither of us could see to the door from where we were, but it was just around the corner. Kevin slowly got up and peeked around the corner and motioned for me to wait where I was. When he did, he came sort of running back. He said that there was a guy there. I couldn't resist, and I got up and peeked around the corner as well. Kevin was right. There was a man standing at the back door, but it was really dark, and I couldn't tell any details about him. I ran back, and I don't think the man saw us, but to be honest, I really have no clue. We tried to figure out what to do. Neither Kevin or I had a cell phone, but luckily, there was a home phone in the basement. Kevin got it and called his dad and told him what was going on. He said his dad was coming home and should be back in like 10 minutes. In the meantime, we had to figure out what to do. I looked again to see if the guy was still there, and he was. We heard him try opening the door again. Thank goodness it was locked. Kevin and I didn't want to stay downstairs any longer, and we both ran upstairs. We went into Kevin's bedroom and shut the door. From there, we couldn't hear the man trying to open the door anymore, but we figured that we would be able to hear him if he got inside the house. Not too long after, we heard the front door opening, and then heard the voice of Kevin's dad. We went downstairs and showed him where we had seen the man, but the man was now gone. Kevin's dad went outside and looked all around the yard, which was about an acre. He came back a while later, saying whoever was there was now gone and he probably wouldn't come back. After that, Kevin and I played a little more video games until it got late. Then we went up to go to bed. Kevin actually had a bunk bed. I'm not sure why, because he had the whole room to himself, but I slept on the bottom bunk and Kevin slept above. It took me a while to fall asleep. Kevin seemed to fall asleep pretty quick, but I just wasn't quite as tired. I laid in bed relaxing and trying to get tired, but then I heard another noise. It broke the complete silence in Kevin's house. It was the sound of something hitting Kevin's bedroom window. Then I heard it again. I looked to the window but saw nothing. My heart started racing and I was telling myself that it was nothing, but I wanted to be certain, so I got up and went over to the window and looked outside. But when I did, I saw a guy standing down below looking right up at me. I jumped back and ran and woke up Kevin. He was super confused at first, but then got up and looked out the window. The man was still there. Kevin ran to his parents' room and woke them up. I stayed at the window and looked outside. The man was walking closer to the house, and before long, Kevin's parents entered the room and his dad walked over to the window. At that point, the man turned and ran away. The police were called, but when they arrived, the guy was long gone. The man didn't return for the rest of the night, and I went home the next morning. I was glad that I didn't live at Kevin's house, because I would have been really afraid that the guy would return. However, I never heard Kevin mention anything about him again.